All right. Well, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Hello.
I think we'll have a few more join us. I know Lori and Elena are here, but doing coffee. But we'll get started. We'll see where we go today. There's lots of places to go in this portion. So I will pray and bless the Lord, and then we'll get started. So Lord, I just thank you for Shabbat. I thank you for the day of rest. I thank you for a day of set aside time to just listen for your voice and experience your presence on a deeper level, Lord. I just ask that your presence would be here with us, that you would direct the conversation, that we would know which path to take in our discussion this morning, Lord, and I ask that your presence would be with us during service as well and throughout the day, Lord. And Lord, I just thank you so much for the Torah, for your word that we get to read and learn and experience you through it, Lord. B'Shem Yeshua.
Amen.
Okay, so our portion this week is called Pinchas, or Phineas, and this is my birth portion.
What?
So that's fun. And for the first time in several years, it has fallen on the week of my birthday, because my birthday was on Monday. So
Happy birthday!
Thank you. So it's been a week off or so the last several years because of the fun of the Hebrew calendar, which I actually thought today, because we talk about all the festivals toward the end of this portion, I was like, we could have a calendar discussion today, which we still could. I like to talk about the calendar. It's glorious and confusing and wonderful all at the same time. So, but we'll see. We'll see if we go that direction or not. So anyway, so we start out, the portion is called Pinchas because of Pinchas or Phineas. But it starts out in an interesting place. So I actually want to back up a little bit and look at the whole little section about Phineas, because it kind of was half in last week's portion and half in this week's, which always kind of bugs me. I'm like, can we not have the whole story in the same portion, please? So we're going to back up to the beginning of chapter 25 in Numbers. So we'll kind of take this. There's kind of like each chapter, more or less. The last two chapters are kind of go together, but each chapter more or less is kind of a very different topic in this portion. It's one of those that the commentators tend to be like, this is evidence that ancient literature is not always concerned with chronology so much, and they're not always concerned with having a perfectly cohesive narrative. They're kind of it's a little bit interesting. They drop some things in interesting places, but that's okay. So we get a lot of different things in the portion. So we'll start with chapter 25, and we'll just kind of go through and we can just talk about whatever kind of, good morning, whatever kind of comes out to us. So, and of course this is just after the whole Dylan's, if you weren't here, didn't hear Dylan teach last week, he did an excellent job of talking about how we engage with the text, and we went through this really interesting series of prophecies from Balaam and Balak and all of these things, and talking donkeys, and good times. So yeah, but his teaching last week was really, really good. So if you didn't hear it, I would encourage you to listen to that. Anyway, so we're coming right after that whole situation, and then we go into what happens with Phineas. So I'm just going to read this section for us, and then we can talk about it. So while Israel was staying in Shittim, the people began to have immoral sexual relations with women from Moab. Then they invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods. So the people were eating and bowing down before their gods. When Israel became bound to Baal Peor, the anger of Adonai grew hot against Israel. Adonai said to Moses, "Seize all the ringleaders and hang them before Adonai facing the sun, so that Adonai's fierce anger may be turned away from Israel." So Moses said to the judges of Israel, "Each of you kill your men who have been joining themselves to Baal of Peor." Then behold, a man from Bnei Israel came and brought a Midianite woman to his brothers before the eyes of Moses and the whole assembly of Bnei Israel, while they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the Cohen, saw it, he arose from the midst of the assembly, took a spear in his hand, and went after the man of Israel into the tent and pierced them through, both the Israelite man and the woman's belly. Then the plague among Bnei Israel stopped. However, 24,000 were dead because of the plague. Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the Cohen, has turned away my anger from Bnei Israel, because he was very zealous for me among them, so that I did not put an end to Bnei Israel in my zeal. So now say, see, I am making with him a covenant of shalom. It will be for him and his descendants after him, a covenant of everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and atoned for Bnei Israel." I'm going to stop there for now. He goes into actually naming the people who were involved in this incident, I guess, and speaks to them and has them deal with the Midianites. So, hi Tom. So this is a really interesting story. So Phinehas. So first of all, what's significant about Phinehas and his lineage?
Can I back you up a
Yes.
little further?
Yes, you can.
Why would this guy have brought this woman and did this knowingly in front of all these people? It didn't say he was trying to be sneaky about it. Just boom, right in front of everybody, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Why would he do that?
That's a good question. They do. It does seem that we have a pattern of the Israelites are very bold in their rebellion. Very frequently.
Was that what it was? Rebellion?
Yeah. I mean, because we know like they've had all these instructions and all these. You're not to take these women as your wives. You're not to really mingle with the pagans. Basically, is what the instruction has been. So they know they're not supposed to be mixing with these people, and so. But they're human. And
basically, they were just giving them the finger then, right?
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
That made me think of how the Midianites went about in deceiving them with Peor and Cosby, because they were behind it. So to what extent we don't know, but in that light, if we look at it through that lens, you're like, what did they must have say that would put some Israelites in a position to bring the woman in from, in front of the tent? Or does it kind of read like, oh, and we found this Midianite woman, and they brought her before the tent of meeting, and all the children were weeping? That's kind of like where I got crossed up there. Because what were they weeping about? That they found the woman in the tent, or because this plague was whacking everybody out? And then, in addition to the harlotry with the Moabite women, now we have Midianites in the camp too. This just went unrecognized. So were they crying about that too?
Yeah, I think the weeping, because there's this plague, and because there's, I think while there's the ones who are rebelling, there are also still the ones who are obeying and being righteous, right? And so I think we have a well-established pattern of when some or most even are rebelling, there's always those who are crying out to the Lord. And so I think we probably have that happening here. But I think it's, I don't know, it doesn't say this in the text, but as they're getting closer to going into the land, it seems that the other nations around them and these other groups of people are recognizing that there's something going on with these people. serve a powerful God. And so I think there's this they're trying to stop what's the inevitable. They're trying to stop the Lord from advancing. So they're trying to, they're using their women to seduce the men. They're intimidating them. There's all these things kind of going on, we're going to talk about this in a little bit when we get to the census that we have in here. Like, they're getting real close to actually starting the conquest to go into the land. And so as they're preparing this, there's probably some military activity going on. There's a lot happening as they're preparing to do this, and other people are taking notice. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's this attempt to kind of deter them and to kind of, make sure that they're not successful in their plan.
This goes beyond rebellion. This is contempt that's off the charts.
Well, it says in 25:1 the people were having immoral sexual relations with women from Moab, and then they invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods. So the people were eating and bowing down before their gods when Israel became bound to Baal of Peor. So, yeah, your answer is yes. They are worshiping, bowing down, eating, and then sleeping with the women. This is all of the worst commandments being violated at once. Right. All of the cardinal sins, essentially. I guess not shedding innocent blood, but so yeah, this is rebellion, all right.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting that we have this this account of them sacrificing to other gods, and then the end of the portion when we come to later about the festivals, it's all about the sacrifices. So it's like, the Torah has all of these contrasting stories, it's really interesting. Like, they went and they were sacrificing to their wrong gods, and then there's so much detail about on Shabbat, daily you do this, on Shabbat you do this, on Passover, on Sukkot, and it goes through each festival, and it details the sacrifices and the offerings to, basically saying this is how you're supposed to do it. So it's interesting, that we have that contrast as well.
One of the things I noticed in this, this woman, and maybe geographically, this merges together, but this woman, it doesn't say she was a Moabite. She was a Midianite, which was Jethro's group. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like another group got also, unless I've got this wrong, is this like another group of people that have succumbed to this form of worship? Because Jethro was a Midianite priest, correct? Mm-hmm. And so he acknowledged Moses as God. So to me it seems like a whole other people group also got sucked into this system of worship, or am I off on that?
Well, the Midianites, yes, Jethro recognized Adonai, but he didn't turn to follow him. He still went back, and so there was already this, pagan worship happening in the Midianite people, okay. And we don't know that stopped.
Okay.
Because again, and we don't know all the details of that, but again, polytheism was normal. So they're like, hey, that God's really cool. We'll put him in our file, and if we need to call on him, we will. But we're going to keep worshiping all these other gods, which of course we know Adonai doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
But that's why the Israelites and Adonai that's one of the purposes of, we've talked about this before, of the Torah, is that showing how Adonai and the Israelite people are not like the other people. And this particular account, we're showing that they're still drawn into the normal pattern of these other people groups of the day. But I think one thing about this too, and I think where we can, find some hope, because I think we can get really caught up in the, God gives does all these amazing things. He does all these miracles. He rescues and delivers and promises inheritance, and then the people rebel or they turn to other things, and that can be really discouraging. But the thing about this particular passage is that we have this example of Phineas. There are always the righteous ones, and so this is a big example. His zeal is strong. He's really sure he's going the right direction about this, that he's willing to go and drive a spear through two people.
Emma.
Yeah.
Aaron's grandson.
Yes. Well, his grandson. You're right.
That was the answer to your question.
Yes, that was my earlier question. Yes. No, you're good. So Phineas is the son of Eleazar, who is the son of Aaron. So he's the high priestly line. So he kind of has this, Eleazar at this point, of course, we had a couple weeks ago, Aaron's death and kind of the passing of the high priestly mantle to Eleazar. And Phineas is next in that line. And so we have this, they're kind of the high priestly role, of course, is kind of given the assignment of this really high honor of the tabernacle, of the people, of helping the people truly be righteous and to follow the Lord. And so he has a really intense response to this situation that is defiling everything, defiling Israel basically at this point. So it's interesting to see that progression, because it's, in some sense that is Phineas's inheritance, is to have this zeal and to protect the house of the Lord. And it's interesting that after this, Adonai's response is because of his zeal, that he's going to make a covenant of shalom. Yeah. So in the midst of all of this chaos, the Lord is promising shalom, which is really kind of saying, I'm going to fight back against this chaos, right? I'm gonna come against this chaos, and I'm gonna bring you peace and order. And so he's kind of using Phineas as this example of that. Okay. Anything else before we move on? Yeah.
You just made me think of the golden calf incident with the Levites, and I wonder if that wasn't something that Phineas had heard about, and that zeal, and in this instance, Abba didn't have to say, who's going to stand with me? He went on his own, and he stood for Adonai, and went and did what he had to do, the hard thing, without being told. So I wonder if that was something that was passed down, that's one of the reasons why they were honored as firstborn, even more so with the high priest.
Yeah, I think he would have known the golden calf incident. I think he would have known about the rebellion of Korah, because it says here that 24,000 died in this plague. He would have known about the same number ultimately by the time all the events of the rebellion with Korah happened, about the same number. So yeah, I think he realizes there's a sense of coming in the opposite that is required to stop these great plagues, and so I think he's stepping out in that. Yeah.
And I would just say, this is this portion's kind of weird because it's like the end of last week. So
I know, that's why I went and picked up. I was like, I want the whole story.
But it's not just that he's remembering back. The text actually commands, Moses is commanding the judges of Israel,
right,
to kill your men who have been joining themselves to Baal. So why did he say that? Because God told him to kill them. So the Lord tells Moses, and then Moses tells the leaders to kill anyone who's doing this. So this isn't just a individual act of zeal. Right. He is actually fully submitted to heavenly authority and earthly authority. So this is, sometimes people will refer to Pinchas in some sort of maverick, John Wayne taking the law into his own hands, but that's not what's happening at all. In fact, he's completely submitted to the leadership of Moses, who says, kill them, the people that are doing this. Similar to that story, though, where he says to the Levites, draw a line in the sand and then kill the one like that. So it's still not just, well, God told me to kill this person, right? There's this question today on people. It's like, well, yes, you want God to tell you, and you have heavenly and earthly authority affirming some sort of dramatic act like this, which is very significant that we don't just think we could take the law and justice in that sense, or judgment in our own hands.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
I think it also kind of shows when you're obedient and zealous for the Lord, He'll respond to you in a positive way. I mean, we've got a God who responds when people act for Him. Whether it's Moses, whether it's sacrificing, He's right there in the midst, and He's going to if you're coming against Him or sinning, we see His response of plague and anger. But when you're being obedient and you have this zealous heart to do the word and what would please Him, you see Him now responding in this, I'm going to give you shalom and I'm going to make a covenant. So like, He's a God of two extreme responses in this portion. It's either plagues or it's covenant shalom. So I like that parallel, that when He's there in your midst, there's going to be a response.
Yeah, it's good. And the other thing I notice about this is that the step that almost appears to be missing, I guess, is that Adonai intervenes and speaks to Moses and tells him what to do, and in turn Moses tells the judges of Israel what to do, without the step of Moses having to fall on his face and beg the Lord to intervene.
Good.
So, which could mean different things. I mean, because I noticed about this, like, it's such a short narrative. Like, these other rebellion, like, there's a lot of back and forth, and there's a lot of, like, this is why, and this is how this happens, and, like, instruction involved in it. And this is very much like, there's rebellion, but there's also still the righteous one, and the Lord just speaks. Like, Moses doesn't have to go, because it says that the anger of Adonai grew hot against Israel, which that's part of the normal process. But then normally we see Moses falling on his face and pleading with him to not wipe out the people, right?
Yeah.
And we don't see that, which is interesting.
It's a good observation.
So it seems like we've talked about a progressive revelation. So it seems like they're at the point here where it's like, they don't have to quite go through all of that. Adonai's just so maybe it's even just the Lord knows, like, He doesn't have to go through this trust building exercise, which is really what that is when Moses falls on his face, that He's like, He knows that they're going to respond when He speaks. Like, He doesn't have to give. The reason they don't have to, He doesn't need them to go through the process of remembering who God is and coming before, like, they already know. And so they're just going to do what He says.
Yeah, a maturity level where, like you do with your kids when they're littler, it's a little bit more of a explaining why I don't want you to do this. Then once the expectations are totally known, then and so it almost seems like there's been a maturity level here of we've walked a long time now, you know what the expectations are.
Right. So it's an interesting, it's a different dynamic of this just automatic response, which is also encouraging to see. It's like, okay, they are learning. Some of them are getting this. Their commitment to the Lord is getting stronger as we kind of are in this moment of some generational transfer, which is where the next kind of chapter takes us. So in chapter 26, we have.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
In verse 18, it talks about Cosby, the woman who was slain with Zimri, but who's this Peor all of a sudden coming in?
The Peor incident?
Baal Peor.
Yeah. So it's.
That's the whole incident of them, causing them to sleep with the women and
Yeah.
worship their idols and all that. The beginning of the chapter,
Verse 3.
Okay.
verse,
okay.
yeah, 3.
Yep. Okay. So when we go into chapter 26, we have this Adonai is commanding Moses and Eleazar to kind of take another census. So of course the book of Numbers kind of opens with a census as they've come out of Egypt, and so now they're doing it again, and of course then we go through and list a lot of names and a lot of people. But anyway, this census is interesting. So what was the purpose of the first census that was taken at the beginning of Numbers? When they come out of Egypt and they're heading towards the promised land, it's really important to know as you're about to try to conquer a land.
Just the fighting men.
Mm-hmm. The fighting men. So they're trying to see how big their army can be, right? Which, going back to Numbers 1 verse 3, you and Aaron are to muster by their divisions every son from 20 years and upward available to serve in the army of Israel. So the first census is kind of a military census, which this one is maybe sort of as well. But what's significant about this one? What does he say about go down to verse in Numbers 26, going down to verse 52? Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "The land is to be divided to these as an inheritance according to the number of names." And he designates for the larger, you are to make his inheritance larger, and the smaller, you to make his inheritance smaller. Each is to receive his inheritance in proportion to his population. So this is about inheritance. It's about land, right? Because this is also kind of showing us that at this point, that the wilderness generation, those that actually came out of Egypt, most of them have died off at this point, and the next generation has come up, because who they're numbering are not the same people that they were numbering before. And so kind of pointing us again to, like, we're heading towards the conclusion of the wilderness, I guess you could say. That they're preparing for this, and part of that not only is the military power to conquer the land, but also once they get there, how are they going to divide it up, and how are they going to decide on the inheritance? And an interesting thing, again, going on into the kind of looking toward what the next chapter of this portion is about, is that and I didn't look at what verse it was in. Somewhere in here, there it is. In 26:33, it mentions Zelaphafat, who had no sons, only daughters, which is the only daughters mentioned in this census. And then we have more about that coming up. So that's kind of our hint that this is important. Because it's interesting when going through a census or even a genealogy, when women are mentioned, it's something to take note of, right? It's even like looking at the genealogies of Yeshua, they include some women in that, which is significant. So this census is about inheritance and about looking towards actually going into the land. Any other comments on that section? So then, as we move into chapter 27, we have this really interesting interaction about these daughters. So, like I said, this is my birth portion, so this is always interesting to me. I always take note of this because I am a daughter of a man who has no sons, and that's just kind of one of those funny things that's like, huh, that's interesting, Lord, that would be my portion anyway. I don't know what all that means, but it just kind of is funny to me. But anyway, this is a really interesting kind of situation that's put into the Torah. And we've kind of talked about before, like Leviticus gives us the law, right? It gives us the instruction of like, in a perfect world, this is how you live. This is the ideal. This is the goal. This is what you're going towards. You want to live in the way that's described here. And then as we move on, we realize that people are people, and that things don't tend to go quite that way. People don't tend to follow the rules, and life just doesn't work like the ideal. And so we have things like this where a situation comes up that's not described, and it's like, well, then what do we do? Because, there's instruction about inheritance and how it passes and the right of the firstborn, but it's all based on sons. So then what happens when there are no sons? And that's kind of what we have here. Maybe we'll just read this section and then we can talk a little bit more about it. Okay. Verse 1. The daughters of Zelaphafat, son of Hefer, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, of the families of Manasseh, son of Joseph. The names of his daughters were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, stood before Moses, Eleazar the Cohen, and the princes of the entire assembly at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and said, Our father died in the wilderness, but he was not one of the followers banding together against Adonai with Korah, though he died for his own sin, yet he had no sons. Why should our father's name diminish from his family, just because he had no sons? Give to us property among our father's brothers. So Moses brought their issue before Adonai, and Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, The daughters of Zelaphafat are right in saying that you should give them property by inheritance among their father's relatives. You are to turn over their inheritance of their father to them. Furthermore, you are to speak to Bnei Israel, saying, If a man dies without a son, you are to transfer his inheritance to his daughter. If he has no daughter, you are to give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, you are to give it to the father's brothers. If his father had no brothers, you are to give it to the nearest relative in his family, that he might possess it. This is to be a legal statute for Bnei Israel, just as Adonai commanded to Moses. Okay. So this is really interesting. So this is yet another way that Israel would stand out among the nations, because this is not a normal thing. Normally, if there's no son or other male relative to take the inheritance, it goes to someone else, kind of whoever gets it first, probably, I don't know. But the point is, this transfer to the daughters is not normal. And even the fact that it would go to the daughter first before a brother or before another male relative is also significant in really honoring that particular family line. And so it just, I don't know, it brings up a lot of things about inheritance in general, and I think that there's a lot we could talk about with that. But it's, but the fact that, I think that the Lord's response is not even about this particular situation, but gives kind of a whole framework for even more than this, even other situations based off of this is significant, and shows that he is really, he really wants to keep, that the family line is important, that blessing and whatever that inheritance is at that particular family line, that it's important that it stays within that family and doesn't just get dispersed and lost among other people. So, and again, this is another one of these portions. People like to point their finger at the Torah and the Old Testament, or the Tanakh in general, and say how terrible it is for women. But that is not the case. We've talked about other examples of that. Yeah.
Society now, do they keep track of their family line the way that they used to? Anybody know?
Are you talking like as far as like Israel, like the Jewish people,
Yeah, the
or
Jewish people in general? Is that as important now as it used to be?
So I don't know. I don't have probably an exhaustive answer for this, but I think there are within specific families, maybe not. We don't know the specific divisions of the tribes that has been lost, as the Jewish people have been in the diaspora for a couple thousand years. But there are some who will. I've heard of different families who will say, we were from the tribe of Benjamin. Levites tend to be, or from the priestly line, tend to claim that the most, and that partially even comes from names like
Cohen.
Yeah, the last names of Cohen or Levi or different variations of that tend to point to the priestly line. But outside of that, I don't know that there's.
Some claim Judah also, but
Yeah.
It's a good one.
Yeah, but and this is a big question. This is a big question when people like to talk about the end times, is like knowing who the tribes are and how are we going to know who belongs to each of the tribes. And to that we say we don't know.
Doesn't that answer the question right there?
Right. Yeah, we don't know most of the lineage. There are some who would. There are a few who would claim more of a knowing of their lineage, but for the vast majority, I think the answer is we don't know. You have anything else to say about that, Tom?
I mean, it's hard to prove.
Yeah.
So even the DNA stuff has been
Right.
shown to not necessarily be true. So I don't trust the DNA evidence. People say, "Oh, I took a DNA test."
Right.
But I have a question for you.
Oh, okay.
So,
Oh, good.
why didn't God include this as a part of the original revelation and commandments given to Israel?
It's a good question. Because
And I'm not saying you have to have the answer, but just,
Yeah.
I think it's a good question to ask.
it is a good question to ask.
Could you ask it again?
You ask the question again.
I'm just asking, on the surface, it could seem like, and I don't think this is what's happening, but they're like, God's like, oh crud, I forgot to include this. Like, what happens? What happens if there aren't any sons born? So I'm kind of piggybacking on your emphasis, which was a good point of, there's the ideal and then there's reality.
Right.
So why was this not included, or what can we ascertain, or how would we answer that sort of question? Anybody can respond.
Yeah, I have some thoughts, but
Can I connect it to this week's portion from John that we were supposed to read, where in John 16, Yeshua says, "I still have much more to tell you, but you cannot handle it now. But when the Spirit of truth comes, He'll guide you into the truth." And I think that's just like this constant relationship, constant asking. Yeshua didn't even give them everything, because He wanted them to continue to pursue, continue to ask questions, and then He gave them the Ruach to answer those questions. So I think this is all about, I think we've discussed before, here's your 10 commandments, good luck, you know, I mean, he didn't do that. He
Right.
wanted the continue, inquire of me. I didn't tell you this, so now inquire of me. So I think that's why, in my mind, that's why there wasn't just, here's your list of rules and now follow them and you're on your own. There's a relationship thing there of inquiring, even with Yeshua saying, now I'm going to give you the Spirit. Here's another way to inquire to find out truth about things.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps he wants the people to ask,
Mm-hmm.
or to see this need. I mean, some things are listed for sure, but
Mhm.
progressive revelation where they see, oh, what do we do about that? And that's that relationship
Mm-hmm.
again
Yeah.
and again and again.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Like you said, inheritance wasn't a thing then. They hadn't gone into the land yet, and now all of a sudden they have this situation. It reminds me of the Israelitess who was married to the Egyptian, and her son went around blaspheming the name of God and was getting into fights. That hadn't happened. And then what did they do? They took him into custody. They went to Moses. Moses went before the tent, and he said, all right, anybody who, they dealt with it then as it occurred. So it seems like one of those situations in this instance as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you could get information overload, and if I wait for you to ask me the question, then I know you're ready to listen to the answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think all of that is really good, and that's, you know, that would be a lot of that would be my answer too, is especially coming down to the relationship aspect of just like, because there's something about these daughters understanding the character of God that they're even willing to ask. You know, like, I think that had God, their understanding of God been that, like, this is what he said, it's rigid, it's, you know, it is just this list of rules, it's this, you know, he came and gave us the law and then he's going to go away. If that were their understanding, I don't think they would have asked the question.
That's good.
But their understanding is that God has shown up in impossible circumstances and made a way for generations. And so they're like, he might have an answer for this.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to ask the question. And it's like, there's a saying now, it's like, if you don't ask, the answer's always no. You know, so it's like, you know, and they're looking out for, like, they're wanting to know, like, they're going to be taken care of. Because if they have no inheritance and no land, I mean, then their entire well-being and lineage is based on their husband. And there's later instruction that they have to, that because of this inheritance issue, that they are to marry within their tribe, so that the land, you know, because this is also about, ultimately going to be about land, and so that inheritance of the land ultimately when they get there has to stay within the same tribe. And so there is that later, in a few chapters there's another later addition to that. But the point is that they're fighting for their father's inheritance and legacy, and for that to be known, and that's important to them. And so I think I do think it says a lot about their understanding of who God is, that they're even willing to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to ask a question related to that. If this is a patriarchal society, as all Near Eastern cultures were, if, as many try to characterize Scripture, or let's just say the Torah, as women are second-class citizens and less than, or something like that, if that's how the women, or the daughters of Zelaphafat, felt that the Israelite culture, that's really how they felt, do you think that they would have inquired of Moses for this? Probably not, right? I mean, if they were just like, well, we're women, so we're, by definition, we are less than.
Right. And
would they have been so as bold as to ask
Right.
Moses to go before the tent of the manifest presence of God? You know?
Right.
They might now.
Right, and that's actually my point along with that. But also notice that this does not revolutionize the whole system. This does not turn the whole patriarchal system on its head either.
That's
good.
You know, I think that's also significant. Adonai's response is not like, all right, doesn't matter. There's, you know, because I think if that were the case, I think that Adonai's response would have been, all right, it doesn't matter if the firstborn is a son or a daughter. Firstborn gets inheritance. You know, and it would change he would have reconstructed the entire system to where men and women carry all roles equally.
And he would have screwed up the first revelation. Like,
Right.
oh, forget that one.
Yeah.
I think that's back to progressive, cumulative revelation.
Yeah.
It's not just progressive, because you could say progressive. No, we value,
Right.
But it's progressive, cumulative, meaning it's building upon itself. It doesn't violate the essence or
Right.
the principles of what came before it.
Right. And it's because it's also acknowledging they have nothing to do with their family. It's not their fault they don't have an older brother or a brother. You know, and did they have a brother, part of his responsibility would have been to care for them as well until they were married. And so he's basically saying all people are worthy of having security and stability and being able to be cared for.
Amen.
And so, but again, he's not disrupting and rewriting the whole system. He's saying this is a situation, and there are going to be other situations of this type where we don't just, resign to the fact that ultimately, if they have no inheritance and no other family members take them in, what are their options? Slavery and prostitution, right? It's like we don't resign someone to that fate. They are to be people are to be cared for, and to have, basic needs and basic things met.
I think too, perhaps maybe I'm reaching here, but he's just pointing to the fact that the bloodline is important.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it should, ideally go through the son, but then if the father didn't have a son, and so then if you didn't have any, then it goes through the father's brothers. And so, but if, say, out of these 2 million people, the father didn't have a brother, he had a sister, well, I don't think they have to take it back to the tent of meeting and ask God, what about if the father only has a sister? Because he's already saying the bloodline is important. Women can be considered in that bloodline in the absence of a male. And so I think he's just giving a general direction of look, just follow the bloodline. There's going to be instances where even these aren't all met, but just follow that bloodline and the closest living relative, then it gets it. Is that a safe assumption?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to some of what Dylan was talking about last week. He was talking about how we are, how we engage as readers of as readers, how do we understand and how do we look at this and understand? And I think part of this is, and I think this is a part of why, their society is so communal. And authority becomes more communal. Of course, right now we still have Moses, who is, the direct line to God, but ultimately it becomes more of a plurality as time goes on. But I think it's kind of based on what you're saying is there's this idea that collectively you understand the character of God, and so when these unique situations come up, you can inquire of the Lord together, and based on previous, that's one of the principles Dylan was talking about last week, is we start to see themes and patterns develop. We start to see things that are important and character aspects of the Lord that are important. And so as you develop that, and that's why it's so important that we continue to read and study this, particularly, why we read the Torah every year. We don't just read the Torah and check a box and say, I read it, and then we go back and revisit it, is that ultimately we begin to understand the character of the Lord, and then as we inquire of him and we hear him respond to us, and we talk to other people about how we should respond in a situation, our chances greatly increase that we are going to come to a response or come to a conclusion that is in line with the character of the Lord. And so I think even this interaction addressing this situation is a really good example of that. Like I was mentioning before, of the daughters understanding that the Lord would have an answer for them, and that Moses then did not turn them away and just say, I'm not asking the Lord about that. Like, so Moses' understanding of the character of the Lord was his honor for people as well, which is also really important. So again, which goes back to what Tom was saying earlier about this aspect of heavenly authority and earthly authority. Like this is another example where those are coming in line really, really well and giving us a really good example of how to approach situations that Torah has not, explicitly laid out beforehand. So.
Can I ask another question?
I feel like I'm just being interviewed or something. I'm just kidding.
So, because I feel like it's kind of a big deal. What else does this teach us about the fact that not all the commandments are actually written in the Torah? I mean, isn't that what we would probably conclude, is that they're not all written there, right? Because situations are going to come up, right? So that should really inform something foundational for all of us about what we are and are not supposed to do, about what's right and what's wrong, and what can we connect those dots a little bit? I don't have a clear way to ask this question. I have to think about it, but you hear what I'm saying? So not all the answers are not in that book.
Right.
There's another way to say it.
Right. So basically what you're saying is we're all going to be presented with situations where we can't just go and find chapter and verse that give us the answer to whatever situation we find ourselves in. So how do we proceed when those situations come up, I think is your question.
Yeah, which you kind of just addressed. Right? I mean, how did the Daughters of Zelaphafat do it?
So now that we don't have a prophet like Moses, we don't have a person with that ultimate authority standing in front of us. We don't have a tabernacle. We don't have a priesthood. How do we deal with that?
We inquire of the Lord.
Yeah. And what does that mean? That's a phrase that we use. What does that really mean? What does that look like practically? What does inquiring of the Lord look like?
I don't think we can do it fully without knowing his character. I mean, or rightly.
And how do we know his character?
His character by studying.
And
his.
And I mean, my point is we need to find the fullness of what inquiring of the Lord, what looking like his character really means. So that's what I'm wanting us to talk about now is how do we do that? And can you do it alone?
No, communal.
Yeah, I think we need each other to do that, which I think is what we're seeing here, and I think what we see in other texts throughout the rest of Scripture is they go inquire of the elders at the gate. They go inquire of a plurality of people, and I think so. Going back, let's go back and continue to talk about inquiring of the Lord. So knowing his character, we have to do it in community.
And you do it in community because how many times, when somebody will say, well, God told me to do this, and you can step back and go, that really doesn't sound like God.
Right.
I mean, sometimes if you have studied his word and you learn of his character through the word, then it's easier to gauge if this seems totally contrary to what his word says. God's not going to have you do something totally contrary to what the word says. It's just he didn't lay that out just to then let you do your own thing, and so this is kind of like a guideline, and then there's going to be bullet points in there that you're going to have to put in, but if you kind of look at it as an outline, and then you need to go in and start filling in below the chapters of of individual things. I also think though with this, the daughters inquiring, there wasn't a selfishness, it seemed like, in their inquiring. They weren't like, give me mine.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, more of it was like, should our father's name be diminished?
Right.
They had they said, give us property among our father's brothers. So they were still living with family. It's just, you know, and they even point out, like, our dad wasn't part of the Korah thing,
Right.
you know? I mean,
Right.
they're kind of like making a case for their father's name and keeping what was their father's. And so they just didn't want to see that diminished. So I don't even feel like it was so much of a selfish, hey, what about us
No.
either.
Well, I don't think
you know?
Yeah.
giving mine is selfish.
No. But
Necessarily.
yeah, but I think in this their approach was correct.
Yeah.
And when you approach the Lord on something,
Mm-hmm.
is your approach correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that goes back to that's a piece of inquiring of the Lord too. It's like what's our posture as we inquire of the Lord, right? And I think what you said too of you know, part of it being important to do in community is like we all have blind spots, and we all have tendencies towards, you know, some of us have areas that we are more likely to listen to a voice other than the Lord or something like that. None of us are perfect. So, or you know, the enemy becomes really convincing in some area. And yeah, you can say, I heard the Lord say this. And then you say something to someone else that's like, really? But like you're saying, like, that doesn't sound like God. At the same time, we all have an individual responsibility to sit before the Lord and listen to what he's saying. But then also, yes, I think there's this submission process to looking at how does that line up with scripture? How do, you know, what do authorities in my life, people who know me well, you know, like people who know you really well, when you start to talk about what the Lord says, they're like, that sounds more like you than the Lord. You know?
Yeah.
It happens. Yeah.
This just seems so hard. It'd be much easier to just start your own little sect and make up a whole bunch more rules to resolve all those things for you.
Yeah.
I think that's happened.
A whole lot.
That's part of my observation as we're talking. It's just that actually more laws doesn't really solve the problem.
Right.
You know, like, does
Right.
it? I mean, you could have thousands and thousands and thousands of pages.
I was actually going to say right along those lines that it seems that what Yeshua said about, you know, love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor, like, is so all-encompassing that you can almost just reflect on that for so much. And just with those two simple rules, like, all else is encompassed in that. Yeah, there's going to be little minutiae, little things that aren't answered. You know, necessarily you're still a little confused. Well, who am I honoring by doing this? But at that point, you know, then take it to the Lord in prayer and listen to what authority says in your community and relationships. But yeah, it seems that the simpler, he simplified it so much, but to be all-encompassing where you didn't need all those rules.
It's also like counter who he is and what he wants for us, because he could have given us like the answer to every single thing, and then I don't need to ask him for anything or like
Yeah.
put my trust in him. I can just check the manual.
Right. It always, I mean, yeah, it comes back to relationship, right? The relationship with the Lord. Like we need to approach the Lord. So love God is about relationship with the Lord and how we approach him about things like this. And then the love neighbor, like if someone's really going to help you discern if you're hearing from the Lord correctly, you need to have some good relationship with them. Like, I don't really want to go knock on the, you know, there's a lot of great, my example would be, there's a lot of really great churches and really good pastors in this city. I don't really want to just go knock on the door of a church that I've, you know, read the pastor's bio online and think sounds great and ask about what I should do with my life, right? Like, I want to go sit with Tom and Leo or Rich and Sarah, which I have done at times in my life. I've been like, hey, I think the Lord is saying this. Do you think this is, I'm hearing correctly? Or are you like, you need to ask again? You know, like because I have relationship with them, you know? And so I think that love God, love neighbor, and that relational aspect behind that is, goes a long way. And that's actually why I know you guys always think we're going to be done talking about Leviticus, but I can't get away from it. It's like, that's why I love Leviticus, because it's so much love God, love neighbor. Like, I love all the instruction about restitution and reconciliation in the second half of Leviticus. I love it. It's like, you're gonna screw up. This is how you fix it. This is how you maintain relationship instead of causing division, which is, I think, what's really hard as we look at even the body of Messiah and we see all the fracturing that's coming. We see we look at a lot of rabbinic Judaism and we see all of and a lot of Christian denominations. We have a lot of doctrine, right? We have a lot of, we believe this and this and this and this, and there's a lot of teaching about that. You just say you learn to recite the doctrine. You learn to say, I believe these things. But it's like, but what happens when you have a situation like this that doesn't get lined out all perfect? Like, how do you deal with that? So you're saying, more written laws doesn't necessarily help us. It's more of establishing the foundation of relationship and establishing the foundation of relationship based on the character of the Lord and that He has an answer for your situation. That doesn't violate, like we said, this situation did not disrupt the entire structure. But it honored the people who were asking the question. And so the Lord has an answer. The Lord is way more creative and He knows way more than we do. And so, we're feeling stuck and we inquire of Him and we process it with people who are also inquiring of the Lord. We're much more likely to find the solution or hear His answer that doesn't disrupt the entire structure, but also honors the people who are involved. So, which is a lot harder. Those of us who are more structurally and system-minded, like the written system and structure. But the spaces where the graciousness of the Lord and His true character shows up are in those moments where we can't just write the law. So yeah.
I think there's a lot of substance in this, because when the daughters went to Moses and Moses went to the Lord, ultimately it became a legal statute. Mm-hmm. Not just for women, but it was just the rule of it became the rule of operation.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And they got it before they went into the land. Mm-hmm. Before Moses was no longer. They already knew what the expectations were now. When they get into the land, if you've got this situation, because we're talking about division of land, this precedent was now set up. And like I said, they had the brothers, but the Lord gave them the guidelines. He went beyond. If there's no brothers, if there's no. So He was really kind of trying to help them get a really good paradigm on how to keep this land within the tribes, within the, so nothing got portioned out. I think he over and above answered their question.
Yeah.
Right. They asked for one thing and He gave them, came back with a really nice setup guideline, which of course I like those.
Right.
So, so I thought that was really, He didn't answer just what they asked. Mm-hmm. The Lord gave them more than what they asked.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another aspect of this, as I was reading some commentaries about this, another point that I read was there's been a lot of, ever since they were delivered out of Egypt, there's been a lot of rebellion, obviously, and a lot of we're going back, right? Mm-hmm. This is terrible. We want to go back to Egypt. We've talked about how kind of insane that idea is. Yeah. but this request is actually they're still in the wilderness, but this request is based on, like you're saying, this is based on the inheritance and the land that they haven't entered into yet. Mm-hmm. So their request is actually based off of what is yet to come and their faith of we are going there. Mm-hmm. He said we're going. So this matters. It's not they're forward thinking. They're not trying to go back to Egypt, and they're not here we are. Maybe we're gonna die in the conquest anyway. Like, you know, like they're not like just living in the moment, and they're not trying to go back and rebel. They're like, okay, God has said this. This question and the answer has a lot of implication for the future and what God has promised us. So I think I feel like there's even that part of why God goes, you know, his response is so like, is beyond even what they're saying, because their question is with the assumed faith that what God has promised and the inheritance that he promised is coming to them, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of refreshing. Like, we haven't seen that a lot. We've seen a lot of like, no, come on, let's keep going. Like, no, you don't actually want to go back there. Like, let's go. And this is just purely like, okay, God said we're going there. We need to know how this is going to work out, because this has lasting implications. So I really thought that was an interesting perspective as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask. Okay, God gave all kinds of rules and commands and how to behave and where to go and where to navigate and everything. But are there any individual responsibility? Let's say if there is a rule to do something against the judgment of the individual, do I have a room to object to the regulation of God? Because if he tells me to take life of somebody, okay, that's a rule. But I don't feel like to do that. What happened to me now? I don't follow his rules and I'll be punished for that?
I think it depends on where your heart is in doing it. You can be forgiven for that, for misunderstanding, or for not having the big picture.
So,
because if I have to take a life of somebody else, he created this somebody else. Mm-hmm. That's his creature too. Mm-hmm. So I have the right to see the rule and the regulation. I have my own judgment and my own intuition to take this life, to see if he's threatening me or anything, regardless of the rules that I have to follow. Otherwise, I'll be a robot that he pushed button and I have to do exactly what he tells me to do.
Isn't that one of that's one of the things that prayer is for? If you got a problem with what I'm telling you, then come to me and let's talk about it. Pray about it, talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
How would you answer me that I'm telling you, yeah, well, it's your creature too. You want to kill him, you kill him. Don't ask me to kill him.
It sounds like Moses. I mean, you sound like Moses.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Moshe. He's like.
Yeah, he talked to him. I didn't.
Yeah, but he's like, God's like, I'm gonna kill them all. And he's like, but Lord.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You can't kill them all.
Well, but he did afterward.
Right. Well, I'm saying Israel at that point, like, because of their rebellion and disobedience, and obviously Moshe is a pretty righteous man. So I think I think it's okay. The Lord, it's kind of like the Lord isn't offended by us wrestling through his instructions.
Right.
And wrestling through. That's why it's significant that, and kind of like we were talking about earlier, like the Torah is instruction. But there are weightier matters of the law, and it's complicated, right? So sometimes it's like, all right, yeah, you're supposed to do something, but then it's like, well, but unless this, and this happens, and then you're not supposed to do that. Well, how do you know when you're not supposed to take the guy's life?
No.
And in general, you are supposed to, let's say he breaks into your house at night, right? The Torah commandments, somebody breaks into your house at nighttime, you can kill the guy. But should you? Right, like, I say if somebody breaks into your house at night, you got two options. You either kill him with kindness or you kill him, right? It's like sometimes you hear the old lady, and she just started telling them about Jesus, and the guy with the gun in his hand, like, puts the gun down and repents. You've heard that story. Like, that happens, right? And then sometimes she gets killed, too. Right?
I can agree with that, but why should I kill the transparent person, his children and his flags and everything? Okay, I'll kill him because he threatened me, but why should I kill his children?
Well, the issue.
Why? Because I'm afraid that eventually they will have revenge on me or my family. Where is my faith? He committed the crime, or he was threatening me. Why should I kill his child?
Are you referring to the incident with Korah?
Not only Korah, but a lot of incidents there that like in Joshua, when he inherited the country, when he get in, anybody who commits something against the rules, he didn't kill only him, he killed everybody that belonged to his family, even his animals and his children and his next generation, because of the threat and the no faith that eventually those people can grow up and go against me.
None of Korah's kids
That's
were
a very
killed though.
Islamic mentality. Like Saddam Hussein, if somebody threat you, he'll kill him and his children because he doesn't want to wait for them to revenge.
None of Korah's kids were killed.
Yeah, actually this week, we know that some of them survived. But I would say that there are answers to those questions, but that probably, since it's 9:45, there's probably not time. But I'll talk to you about those questions, because those are really, are deep and important questions. But we do need to wrestle with that, because, like, what do we do with that? And I think as you go through the portion, sometimes it does come up on why, but I don't know if we have. I think it's more than a 2-minute response.
Yeah. Well,
but it's a question about the character of God and understanding the character of God.
Huge. And let's look at Yeshua when the woman was brought before and they said, let's stone her and kill her. And Yeshua said, you have committed no sin, cast the first stone. So Yeshua granted mercy. I think God knows the ultimate heart. He created that individual. He knows whether there's redemption within them or not.
Right.
Whether somebody will respond to that.
Yeah, and I think it does come into we do have free will, so we can, that plays into it well. So this is a complicated situation. I think that, and there's also because there's all the other piece of it is also very often God gives this is what I've instructed, if you don't do it, these are the consequences, which sometimes includes death. And also
time for repentance.
And it's a very complicated issue, and we're gonna have to stop there. But I think that wrestling through that is part of is an important process, and I think that there's also this element of he's also responsible for that as well. The Lord takes ultimate responsibility.
Didn't Christ himself ask, isn't there another way of doing this? And God didn't get mad at him.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I think that that's a really important principle in general. I've been thinking about this a lot, and there's someone that I follow on Instagram who has just written a book, so she's been posting a lot on this topic about curiosity, about asking questions, about asking really hard questions, about really complicated, difficult things, where it really does impact how we view God and how we understand God and his character.
True.
And asking those questions and going through those processes is actually really important. And so, which goes back to this whole discussion that we've had about, we don't have written rules rules and regulations for every situation, because this wrestle is so important. I think as much as, and like we talked about, we have examples where people have tried to do this, have tried to write rules and regulations and appropriate responses for all situations, and it still is not exhaustive. It's impossible. And I think that God does that on purpose, because ultimately there has to be a point where we have to turn to him and we have to hear his voice. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where we're going to end for today. And with just like this idea of this example that we have in this text of like, it's okay to ask the Lord and trust that he is going to respond in a way that's in line with the rest of how he's responded in the past and will respond in the future, because he's God and he can do that. So thank you, Lord, for your desire to have a relationship with us, for your desire to hear our questions, for your desire to answer us, and your desire to just be among us, Lord. I just thank you for your presence. I thank you for your word. I thank you for the people in this room and those watching online. And I just ask that you would you would continue to be present with us, and that we would hear your voice as we continue to wrestle through the questions that you have put in our hearts, Lord. B'Shem Yeshua.